This is a Stories to be Told podcast. Hi everyone, it's Tracy DW here again, founder and creator of Stories to be Told. I'm doing this podcast as we come to the end of a second national lockdown here in the UK, and I hope you're all safe and well and beginning your festivities for the next few weeks. If this is your first time listening, welcome and thank you for joining us. If you're a regular listener, welcome back. It's great to have you here. I have had so many messages from friends, family, former colleagues and new listeners who have wished me well and have spoken so highly of the work that I'm doing with these podcasts. I want to thank everyone for their support and encouragement during this difficult time, as I know many of us are going through major challenges, but if we all stick together and support one another, then we can get through this a little bit older, but a little bit wiser, and a whole lot stronger. Now, as I always say, my podcasts do not aim to be the ultimate or only authority on the subject or topic under discussion, but I'd just like to share what I've learnt, and I hope it will provide enough information to stimulate your curiosity to find out more by beginning your own learning journey about the subject and decide for yourself if history is a matter of fact or perspective. So, in this podcast, I'm going to explore and promote discussion around the topic of tea. Yes, that hot cuppa that so many of us make on a daily basis, particularly here in the UK. In today's society, we don't think for a moment why the British are so preoccupied with tea, and more importantly, for the purposes of this podcast, how Britain's interest in tea led to Hong Kong becoming a British colony. Now, colonization is a twofold process, which involves not only settling in and occupying land belonging to an indigenous people, but also the process of establishing control over those indigenous people. Hong Kong, in my perspective, is both of these processes, and they both apply, as Britain may not have extensively occupied mainland China, but the consequences of its colonisation of Hong Kong has been far-reaching, creating repercussions for British and Sino relationships and Chinese policy perspectives towards Europe and the rest of the world that have affected us globally to this very day. For me, Hong Kong, together with South Africa, are both countries that have been on my bucket list for a long time. Known as the fragrant harbour and the land where the dim sum originated, Hong Kong is a place of extremities. It is one of the most densely populated cities on earth and boasts the greatest number of skyscrapers and Rolls Royces, making it one of the wealthiest places to live and work. Being a former British colony, and the last to be relinquished, the colonial process has definitely left a legacy on Hong Kong. Britain first used its harbour as a port for its shipping vessels, as it was a gateway into the Chinese mainland and provided access to other parts of the Far East. Today, its approach to free trade and low taxes makes it an attractive base for many businesses around the world, where millions of business transactions take place every day. Before I get into my podcast, I always like to cover what I call the core knowledge. Hong Kong is a southern peninsula off the mainland of China in the continent of Asia. It was acquired by the British and used as a port during the occupation of India by the British East India Company. The production of tea began in and was exclusive to China and was brought to Europe by merchants from as far back as the 1600s. The British interest in the consumption of tea was financed through the trading of precious metals with China, but proved very costly until the East India Company developed a product that China wanted, a drug called opium. Soon cases of opium were being traded in exchange for tea, but this had an adverse side effect as it became an addiction for millions of China's population. The Chinese emperor of the Qing dynasty at the time soon made the opium trade illegal, confiscating several thousand chests of opium, and due to this, the British took action. After the First Opium War in 1839 to 42 and the Second Opium War in 1856 to 60, the British prevailed and China was forced to sign the treaties of Nanking in 1841 and Tientsin in 1858, allowing the British to trade freely in everything, including opium. China was forced to open up its ports to not only Britain, but other European countries over time and to pay reparation for the cost of both wars. It was the Treaty of Nanking which ceded Hong Kong port along with its island, making it a crown colony in 1843. This extended to the Kowloon Peninsula in 1860 and both were colonised as British territory. Both were also acquired as well as the new territories through a 99-year lease in 1898, which expired in 1997. As for the tea, well, Britain avoided any future disruption to its tea market by bringing tea to India and cultivating it through establishing tea estates, the first in Assam during the 1830s. This decision coincided with the Slavery Act, and so the use of indentured or free workers on the estate was a substitute for enslaved labour. As Britain was able to use India to produce tea without trading opium, the consumption of the drug in China dropped to 0% by the time China had become a republic in 1912. And by 1917, Britain's import of opium to China had ceased. Now, from my perspective, this topic is significant for two reasons. The first reason is that the British interest in tea and the wars it caused saw a change in China's relationship with not only Britain, but other countries such as the US, France and Russia. Almost half of Britain's exports to China passed through Hong Kong, and although, for the most part, China was able to prevent Europeans infiltrating into its interior, it opened up to signing more treaties, as well as the Shanghai International Settlement in 1863, with Britain and the US uniting conclaves in Shanghai, bringing it under British and US occupation. The open door policy was an approach to foreign policy with China, first proposed by the US in 1899, in which China would adopt a system of trade open to all countries. It's important to see how this could encourage anti-Western sentiment in China and its possible contribution to its formation as a republic. I think the second reason for its significance is the current situation taking place in Hong Kong during this pandemic global crisis in 2020. This is in relation to what happened on the 1st of July 1997 when Britain fulfilled its agreement to hand back Hong Kong to China after the lease expired. Millennials will not have any living knowledge of the 1st of July 1997 and may be wondering what the causes of the current conflict in Hong Kong is all about. The joint declaration between Britain and China to hand back Hong Kong to China was signed in December 1984, ratified in May 1985 and registered by China in June 1985. This was overseen by British Prime Minister at that time, Margaret Thatcher, and China's leader and successor of the Qing dynasty, Deng Xiaoping. Central to the agreement was that China would recognise Hong Kong under a one country, two systems process, and this meant that Hong Kong would not be subject to China's socialist policies or systems, and that these policies and systems would not be practiced in Hong Kong. Rather, it would be declared as the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region, where it would be able to remain under its current capitalist system and way of life for the next 50 years. The current conflict in Hong Kong shows that China is no longer recognising this one country, two systems approach, and in so doing is in breach of the British Sino Agreement of 1984 and is potentially threatening to overthrow the Hong Kong Parliament. The year being 2020 means that the term of special administration has only been in effect for 23 years and has a further 27 years to run before the transition expires and Hong Kong is finally assimilated into China's socialist policies and systems. At the time of this podcast, the outcomes of the conflict remain inconclusive, and it is still unclear what the People's Republic of China's agenda really is. Before I end this podcast, as usual, I want to leave you with some questions. What could have been China's weaknesses, making it unable to reclaim its ports back from the Europeans? Did the open door policy actually work to China's benefit? Did it work to prevent China from becoming another European colony? Japan briefly took control of Hong Kong between the years 1941 and 43. What were the circumstances which brought this about, and how did Britain reclaim it? And what of Hong Kong? Is the current behaviour of China towards Hong Kong a deflection away from the global pandemic or a statement of power? If you like this podcast, you can stay on my website and check out my other podcasts where I promote thought and discussion on such topics as the Pink Map Project, The Ultimate Paradox, and A Call to Action, where I share my perspectives about Prime Minister Harold Macmillan's Wind of Change speech from 1960. Remember, you can visit storiestobetold.com for mini-documentaries, alternative history illustrations, and suggestions for biographies, historical places and timelines, all linked to the content of my work. And finally, don't forget what I call the heart and soul of the Stories to be Told movement. My stories or poetic narratives such as Caribbean Wind, Caribbean Rush, and soon to be released Nights at the Round Table, the Berlin Conference 1884, and Gone with the Wind, Macmillan's Wind of Change speech. They're all available on my website and on Amazon in both Kindle and paperback versions. You can always click on the audio samples and try before you decide to buy or download. Feel free to like, follow and share me on Facebook and Instagram, where you'll be updated with events, promotional offers and future releases. Once again, it's been a pleasure and a privilege to share my learning journey with you in this podcast, and I encourage you to either begin or continue your own. History is a matter of fact or perspective. Thanks so much for listening, and see you on the next page.